Welcome to the September 2022 Architectural Guest Series of NORR. I'm Silvio Baldessera, Chair of NORR and founder of NORR and your host. NORR is a continuing education program founded 15 years ago, and the three main goals are to teach, learn, and improve, and to do that continuously. In the program, relies on bringing the best guest speakers in three series: architecture, engineering, which are of equal importance, and the masters, where we learn from the past. Each of the NORR series, starting in 2020, have been recorded with the guest speakers' permission and are available on NORR YouTube for global access. Today's session will be posted in a week from now. Welcome to all of our NORR 14 offices, and a special welcome to the invited guests globally. Welcome also to the invited students from the 14 schools of architecture in Canada, the US, and the UK. You will be the future of architecture. Our guest speaker today is Brigitte Shim. Bridget was born in Kingston, Jamaica, and immigrated to Toronto. She studied architecture at the University of Waterloo in Canada. In 1994, Shim and her partner, Howard Sutcliff, formed Shim-Sutcliff Architects in Toronto. Their design practice explores the integration and interrelated scales of architecture, landscape, furniture, and fittings. Shim-Sutcliff have realized built works in Canada, the United States, Europe, and Asia. To date, Shim and Sutcliff have received 16 Governor General's Medals for Architecture from the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada and the American Institute of Architects National Honor Award. In January of 2013, Bridget Shim and her partner, Howard Sutcliff, were both awarded the Order of Canada. In 2021, the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada awarded Brigitte Shim and Howard Sutcliff the RAIC Gold Medal. I'd like to quote from the jury comments. Their work demonstrates a delineation to material expression and exquisite detail across multiple scales, in addition to creating an intimate connection with each site. They continue to be an inspiration to other architects by demonstrating that exceptional projects are possible, and by their timeless commitment to advocacy, teaching, and mentoring. We wish to recognize them as powerful collaborative duo whose commitment to craft, tectonics, site, and ecology will have a lasting impact on Canadian architecture. And I thought I would quote to you as opposed to trying to do it in my own words, because those are incredible jury comments. Bridget Shim has been a faculty member at the John Daniels Faculty of Architecture, Landscape and Design at the University of Toronto since 1988. Bridget is the 2022 Louis Kahn Professor of Architecture and Design at Yale University School of Architecture, and has been a visiting chair and lecturer at Harvard University's Graduate School of Design, the Cooper Union School of Architecture, the University of Auckland, and many others. I would now like to invite Bridget Shim, who is joining us from the East Hamptons, to talk to us about materializing architecture. Bridget Shim.
So thank you so much, Silvio, for your wonderful introduction. I entitled this talk Materializing Architecture because we actually think about the physicality of architecture all the time. I first of all wanted to thank Silvio for this kind invitation to join this lecture series. I already participated maybe about a year ago in a NORR session with Adele Weeder talking about the work of Ron Tom, and it was really a pleasure, and I'm so happy to be back. I also just wanted to underline that all of the work that you're seeing is a collaboration between my partner Howard Sutcliff and myself and all of the people in our studio. So first of all, there's certain qualities that really are about materializing architecture. Light is a really important one that we think about a lot. This is an early study model for a synagogue in Portland, Maine. And this is a view of our laneway house in a back alley in Toronto. But in the end, for us, the kind of quality of light is really essential. A dining hall we did for a camp for inner city youth. And again, we're using 2x4s and very simple elements to become a light monitor. This is a recent Governor General winning project, a small project on Lake Kawagama in Halliburton. But here you're seeing the light coming in from the south and being captured and entering the space. A view of the integral house, which I will share with you later on, but really the fact that we think about ourselves as painting with light. This is a kind of poster from an exhibition called Details Architecture Seen in Section. And this was a few years ago at the Venice Biennale, but it was a really interesting invitation for us to present our work in section and to think about the role of section. So this was the installation in the Biennale, but we actually thought about walls of light and the way that we actually create these thick walls that amplify and monitor and alter the reading of light. And so we drew these very large sections as part of this exhibition. Here were two very different projects of different scales, a small studio, and then on the right-hand side, a synagogue in Portland, Maine. In a way, the studio is a very simple building, very modest scale, but we're using a kind of clear story light on an angle that actually brings light into the space. And here you can see there's an 8-foot datum, a series of wooden coffers in a birch plywood, but the way that the skylight enters and passes across the wood really creates a kind of glowing condition. And we use different spacing related to different walls. One of the things that we think about a lot as Canadians is winter. We are at 43 degrees latitude. So even our early projects, we often would ask our photographers to go into snowstorms to take photographs because we felt it was so important to capture the dimension of winter. We also often would position the kitchen sink within the row of apple orchards, very much thinking about both the role of winter as a season, but also the role of everyday life. And again, this kind of idea that winter is really part of who we are as Canadians and something we need to be very aware of and conscious of as architects. So here's a series of projects where the winter dimension is actually very much part of the reading of the project. This is a project in Point William, and I'll show you more later. We also did a project called Ledbury Park quite a while ago, and this is actually the winter fountain that's part of the experience, and it's connected to an outdoor skating rink. So again, this kind of role of winter and light is key. And here's a project where we're actually looking at winter water as actually part of the experience and really critical to your understanding of the space. We also think about the role of landscape. So often our projects are really seen as a kind of a way to view the landscape. So here you're seeing this ravine guest house as an object, but at the same time, it's a space. And really its most important role is actually framing views of the verdant ravine landscape. For the same client on the same property, we experimented with an interior space looking at the role of the black locust, which is a very predominant tree in our Canadian ravine, Toronto ravine systems. And here we've used a water jet cut steel to create a kind of homage to the black locust. And here the difference between the previous shot and this shot is really the fact that this is taken in the autumn and you're looking at the color which is created by the autumn leaves in the forest adjacent to it. So we're always thinking about this relationship between nature and culture and the role of architecture as an interface between all of these elements. Also the kind of issue of materializing architecture, which is the title of this talk, really requires getting your hands really dirty. So this is a view of Howard flame cutting the edge of a piece of steel. And really this kind of active participation is really essential for us. This is actually a view in a fabrication steel shop of a full-size mock-up of a panel of a project. And we're looking at the kind of edges, the raised elements, the gaps between them, and all of these pieces really matter. And we work directly with our fabricators to really realize projects that are maybe not the status quo. And to do that requires a level of effort to make sure that we actually have tested ideas and we actually feel totally comfortable that it's the right direction. So here's a view of the weathering steel house. So that mock-up was a panel from the weathering steel house. And here it is mellowed over time, but each of the ridges and the gaps for us were really important. This is a project I'll show you a bit later, which is the Sisters of St. Joseph, but we actually developed a whole facade for their monastery, and we worked with a combination of weathering steel and powder-coated aluminum. So here are some of our drawings, and then in the lower left is a view of a mock-up. This was actually a full-size mock-up of 1.5 floors of the project with as many conditions as we could figure out. And this was built by our fabricator, Rauschmann, out of Germany, and then brought to a testing facility in Bielefeld, Germany, and then tested under extreme wind and rain to really determine before it went into fabrication that this was the best kind of assembly. They fine-tuned and made all kinds of very minor adjustments. And then when you go there, it's now part of the facade of the building. So this kind of testing and retesting and working really directly with our fabricators for us is a really fundamental part of the design process for us. So the first project I'm going to share with you is a bit of a wacky project. It's called the Wong Dai Sin Temple. It sits on Steeles Avenue in Toronto. It's technically in Markham, and it's between Bayview and Leslie, but this was a very early study model that we did. And when they saw this model, they said whipped horse, and we didn't quite know what they meant. But they were part of Taoism, which is one of the oldest religions, is that they actually valued the fact that in their Tai Chi moves, there was both asymmetry and equilibrium at the same time. And when they saw this model, it really spoke to them about that very challenging balance. These are some very early study models of the interior of the space that we did. And then this is actually the project where we actually have 2 cantilevers. There's a kind of series of structural columns in the middle, all connected by a raft foundation, and a 10.2 meter cantilever on one side and a 5.2 meter cantilever on the right-hand side. And one is the counterbalance for the other. It's all done in pre-stressed concrete, and we're working with deep fins of weathering steel to provide large window openings further back for great cross ventilation. You can see the site is super suburban. So you can see next to it is a cul-de-sac with really big houses. And then you can see our project where we're sort of wedged in between. And then we actually are a very simple space. So you can see a back of house on the right-hand side, the main prayer space. And then number 4 is actually a memorial hall where you light incense and you honor your ancestors. So here is a section which is really the key drawing for this project. And you can see the structural bays in the middle, on the left-hand side, the larger cantilever, and on the right-hand side, the counterbalance for that cantilever. And then we've actually included a whole series of light monitors into the ceiling. And then we've also shown you this, both the light monitors and these kind of fins that are part of the project. And here's a view at night where you can see the structural fins marching down the middle, the one cantilever, and then these kind of the way that you can see almost right into the space. And this is a view of the north elevation. And you can see a slightly different shaping of the Corten steel. There's a single elevator that goes up to the main floor and then stairs on either side, and then parking below the cantilever. And this is a view of the sort of west elevation, and again, a view of the structural concrete bays. And we also added skylights into the terrace to bring light into the lower level. And then often what they do is Tai Chi underneath the big cantilever. So there's a canopy on Steeles Avenue providing an indication of the front entrance. And this is the outdoor terrace. And then as you enter, you can see the statue of Wong Dai Sin, and then these kind of light monitors that are also there to hold incense. And they'll actually use long sort of spirals of incense. And then all of the skylights are all motorized so that they can actually have good cross ventilation in the space. And this is the memorial hall for lighting incense to your ancestors. And then a view again of the cantilever and the space underneath. So the next project I want to share with you is the Integral House, which was designed for a mathematician and a concert violinist. Our client, Jim Stewart, said straight lines are boring, and so curves were part of the program. We had to really scratch our heads a bit to figure out how we could absorb curves into our own sensibility. So this is a very early sketch, and this is a very early study model. And in addition to the curves, he wanted a performance space for 200 people in his living room, which is a bit unusual. We actually developed a whole series of wooden fins that actually are shaping the light and framing different views of a Toronto ravine. So this is a drawing that we did of all 97 fins that are angled in different directions and different thicknesses to really create this kind of light modulator for the building facade. And then technical drawings giving you a sense of the way that we embedded, in effect, the glazing into these fins so that you didn't read a window frame, you just read the relationship between light and wood entering the project. And again, they were all fabricated. You can see them all numbered. And these are the exterior fins, and then we have the interior fins. And here's an early mock-up. We had different potential fabricators had to produce a fin as a mock-up for us to determine who we would go with in terms of the actual work. And then we have a standardized fin, which is actually at the lower level. So there's a screen that's made up of an upper level of these shaped angled fins, and then a more standardized fin. And the standardized fin has an epay cap on the exterior, the double glazed units entering it, and then a shaped wood piece. And then every third or fourth one is asymmetrically loaded and structurally connected to the larger structural frame. And here's a full-size mock-up in materials of that same detail. And a view of the standardized fins here in one portion of the project. And then some studies. So here you can see the relationship between the upper fins and the lower fins. And we're looking at it in different locations in the project with the ravine landscape in the distance. And then finally, this is the final result where you're seeing our client Jim on the upper left. And then we actually took photos of every season. So this is actually springtime. This is summer. This is fall. And this is winter. So we really saw this kind of elevation of the building as almost like a golden curtain over the ravine. And for us, this again, nature-culture relationship was really fundamental. And then you can see the section, which actually goes way down the hillside to the Don Valley. So it reads like a 2-story house from one side and a 5-story house from the other. This is a cross section where you can see the entry level and then the performance space, which is at the lower level of the double height space. Bedrooms above, study and gallery below. And then in plan, you're actually looking at the lowest level here with a reflecting swimming pool and back of house. This is actually a level with gallery and study areas. And then this is the main performance level here. And the entry level here, where right at 1 is where you enter into the project. So this is what you would see if you were entering from the street, where you were looking at a profilate shaped etched glass up above and then wooden fins below. And then at entry, you're looking again at the upper level of these deeper wooden fins with views of the ravine on either side. And then this is what it looks like when 200 of your closest friends come over for a nice event. Then coming down the stair, and you can see that we're really working with stainless steel mesh, leather, and bronze, and really combining them, all these materials together. And then always the backdrop of the ravine, which becomes part of your experience. And really you feel as if you've entered a Toronto ravine without necessarily going outside. And then again, the sense of the scale of the house shifting when it needs to accommodate performances, and this kind of dual role of it both being domestic, but also having a public function at the same time. And here's the staircase where we're experimenting with cast bronze and leather and stainless steel mesh. And then there's a lot of very vertical concrete elements. Another view from the other side. And then you're seeing, in effect, this kind of golden curtain, and you're seeing the topography of the ravine descending down. And this gives you a sense of the role of winter light and the relationship between the upper fins and the lower fins, and the way that they become, in effect, a light modulator, giving us a sense of the seasonal qualities of 43 degrees latitude, which is Toronto. And there have been so many amazing performances in the space. So it's been really a kind of a delight to see so many different events happening in the space. And then again, the kind of material palette of the white oak, the limestone, and the bronze being used together in different places. And really the sense of descent down into the ravine, and then frame views of this verdant Don Valley ravine. This is the lowest level where we have a kind of swimming pool. And then there's a 35-foot long window that actually disappears into the ground. So the outside becomes the inside and vice versa. In the project, there's actually a blue glass stair. It's all hand-blown blue glass, and the treads are actually etched glass, and there's a skylight above. And we wanted it to be this enigmatic object in different parts of the project. And then we actually supported the whole thing on bronze rods, and it's all held up with stainless steel cables. And this was really a collaboration between an artist, Mimi Gelman, our structural engineers, Blackwell, and ourselves, and really working together. And then again, just the range of amazing events. This is the Simon Boulevard Orchestra, contemporary dance. This is Nexus and Steve Reich. This is Philip Glass. And this is the Cabbagetown Boys and Girls Club. And in a way, the sense of this kind of experience, the musicians have told us that they feel like they're basically playing inside of an instrument. So for us, that was a really interesting insight into the project. And then finally, a view from the Don Valley, where in effect, you're really looking at it as a 5-story building at the edge of the ravine, but we're really using it to shape the ravine and shape our understanding of this critical edge in the city. The next project is also on a ravine edge. It was actually done for a pretty remarkable group of women, the Sisters of St. Joseph of Toronto. And the image on the left is a view of their Wellesley Street Chapel Monastery. And the image on the right is a view of their Morrow Park facility that was at Bayview and Steeles. So the sisters came to us, and they didn't have a program and they didn't have a site. And so we spent time with them finding a site that was appropriate. And there were many that we looked at that were former Catholic school sites that they rejected. It wasn't the right thing for them. So we actually helped them to find the right site for their new home. And then they wanted the greenest building that they could afford. And so through the whole process, we kept pricing everything all the time to really make sure that it was fiscally responsible and it was as green as we could actually design. And this this kind of healthcare facility or long-term care facility is not known for being green. So we were really happy to kind of work with them to make that a reality. This is an axonometric, but it gives you a pretty good sense of the overall project. So on the far right-hand side, you're looking at the Taylor House, which is an 1850s residence in East York. It was owned by the Taylor family, who owned the brickworks, Taylor Creek, and it is a very fine house. You're looking at the reflecting pool and the chapel in the middle that you can see in the middle of this axo. And then you're looking at a double loaded corridor in the middle and two single loaded corridors going off to either side. And here's an aerial view of the project. You can see the Don Valley in the lower right. You can see the chapel in the kind of little inside corner of the project, and behind the chapel is a double loaded corridor, and then you can see the two wings going off to either side. And then to the left you can see the roof line of the Taylor House, and then the neighborhood in East York, which the site is located in. So it is actually where Broadview turns into O'Connor, and right at that curve is actually our project. Here's a different view, but you can also see the chapel, the kind of residential neighborhood, the double loaded corridor, the two single loaded corridors, the PV panels on the roof, and then a view of the chapel with the Toronto skyline in the distance. And so the project itself is really situated right on the ravine edge, and we had to work really closely with the Toronto Regional Conservation Authority and all of their requirements. At the lower level, there are large congregational meeting rooms, smaller meeting rooms, and a lot of the back of house. And then as we move up, you can see in this plan double loaded units, a double loaded corridor in the middle that has rehab and nursing stations and many of the kind of shared facilities, and then sister suites in each of the single loaded corridors. And then in the very far right, you can actually see the Taylor House. So here's a view of the Taylor House itself in red brick. And it's a really significant building that is designated, it's historic, and we wanted to find a way to incorporate it within this newer complex. Previously, it had been the Ina Grafton Gage Nursing Home, and there were just all kinds of buildings really butted up against both sides of the Taylor House. So you couldn't even read a house. And so we actually had those other wings that were built in the 1920s and 1940s and 1980s removed. And we wanted the house to have a certain dignity to read as a kind of standalone residence. And then we connect everything on the ravine side. So here you can see this cantilevered steel canopy, which is the entrance to the new complex. And you arrive at and here you can see this kind of view from the street of the front facade, which I showed you a bit earlier when I was talking about mock-ups. And then a view of the Taylor House on the right in red brick, and then our new project on the left. So the two sort of almost merge into each other. This is a view of one of the two reflecting pools. And you can see the way that the curves are addressed to become at the lower level outdoor spaces. The kind of fabrication of the outer corten steel and the inner powder coated enamel that really become these large vertical sunshades for most of the primary elevations of the building. And a different view of the kind of entry canopy, and again, a different angle so that you're really looking at the powder coated aluminum versus the corten steel. Under the driveway, which is all permeable pavers, there are 64 geothermal pipes. They go about 300 feet into the ground, and they deal with all the heating and cooling for the whole project. And then a view in the winter of the project. And then a view from one of the upper level single loaded corridors. and a view of the neighborhood and the above side of the canopy. This is a view of the lobby where you're looking on the left of the chapel, the reflecting pool, and the lobby. And we have a kind of pairing of a single column and then what we call our peanut columns, a kind of double-shaped column to really take the load of the building up above and to transfer it down below. This is one of the double-loaded corridors, which is the piece in the middle of the building. And then this is one of the single loaded corridors, which is actually the two wings that go off on either side. And you're also looking at the underside of the structural slab, and then also a kind of drywall underside where we keep all of our data trays for all of the route routing and electrical, so it's very easily accessible when they need to change and adjust things. On the left-hand side is the deeper fins, that is the kind of steel and powder-coated aluminum, and on the right-hand side is a kind of white oak wall, an entry to all the sisters' suites. And so here's a view of one of the windows. Each sister has a door and a window related to the sitting area, and then a view of the chapel. And the sisters talked to us about how important the chapel was. They felt it was like the heart and soul of the whole project. We needed to make sure that infirm sisters could enter in the second floor of the chapel, and more able sisters could arrive at the ground floor. So this is the entry threshold, and water is a key element. So the chapel is sitting in a reflecting pool. This is the upper level of the chapel where you can enter from some of the sisters' suites directly. And then we brought the Stations of the Cross from their old monastery to the new monastery. So it was really like a kind of way of taking a piece of their old home to their new home. And then a view of the chapel itself, where you can see the kind of custom lights that we designed shining up and down, the shaping of the space, which allowed them to view nature, and the relationship between the water and the chapel itself, which was really important for both the sisters and ourselves. And the way that it actually expanded into a whole garden, thinking about the times of the year, the kind of, and so we really planted a natural garden that we felt would work with the kind of ravine landscape. And then again, the role of water as a critical element within the project, and a view of the chapel at night. The next project I'm showing you is actually one that is a 20-year project. We're not that slow, but there are a series of projects that took a long time period with gaps in between. And it sits on the Canadian Shield. So this amazing granite rock, which we all know is part of the kind of reading of our landscape. The boreal forest, which is also a key part, and then our kind of amazing lakes that we have, freshwater lakes everywhere. And so this is a site plan where in the upper portion, you're seeing the boathouse. In the middle, there's actually a 1907 existing building that we have rehabilitated, the main cottage, which is on the lower right, and then a garage building in the kind of lower left. And so all of these buildings form, in effect, this new landscape at Point William. The boathouse we did quite a while ago, and it is a combination of heavy timbers and a more refined Douglas fir wood, and it sits on Lake Muskoka. And we're really working with heavy timbers to create a level of plasticity. I think of this whole project as a laboratory for living, and a whole series of amazing experiments that we were able to develop with our client, who's an architect. And so here we are looking at covered outdoor boat slips that are cantilevered, balconies up above, working with a combination of steel and wood together, a kind of hybrid condition. And at the entry, you're actually looking at the kind of exposed underside of the structural framing in wood, and a kind of view of the lake beyond. Inside the main spaces, we're actually using a kind of 1x2 Douglas fir to create a kind of shaped ceilings. and really kind of views of the lake, and then connecting to the vernacular by using painted oak flooring, which is very traditional for most boathouses in the area. Really bathroom areas that we wanted to feel like outdoor porches. And then the ability to work with hardware, custom hardware. This is all bronze rod inspired by snowshoes. And then custom boat cleats using a kind of stainless steel shackle with a cast bronze element that's set into the wood decking itself. And then a view in the winter of that really small project, but a really experimental and really important project for us, because it allowed us to really test many of our ideas in a quite miniature space. Then we went on to design other buildings on the same property, and we're using porch spaces to really become pathways. We're really thinking about the role of the landscape that's existing and tying everything together. So these ribbons of Corten steel, we actually worked with local fabricators in Bracebridge, and they worked on the site with us really directly, being able to, we would make templates and then they would fabricate it and they would test it on site. And then here we are exposing a lot of the granite rock, and you're in the space between the 1907 existing building and then the new building itself. So we're kind of really working with the found condition and adding new pieces and creating a kind of layered experience. So here you're seeing the big rock that we've exposed. You're looking across at the 1907 building, which we actually reclad in stacked firewood. And all of the roofs are actually weathering steel. And again, built by local fabricators from Bracebridge, who really set up all of their sort of equipment on site and would go back and forth between their shop, but really kind of were the key people in local fabricators that helped us realize this project. And then the same view at night, you're looking at a fire pit on the right-hand side, and then this kind of found existing building that has been reworked, and then the new building, really more about shaping a place in the Canadian landscape. And maybe the work you do as an architect is as much about erasing as it is about adding. And so here's the piece that we revealed by erasing built form that was already there. We actually revealed this amazing rock, which had always been there. And maybe being more, for us, it was better to be removing and revealing than always adding. In the main elevation, so you can see again this rock that continues, this primary elevation. Experiments with hardware, a kind of entrance that feels like a porch, using very deep fins to really create frame views. And then this shaping of the underside of the ceiling, echoing some of the work in the boathouse done many years earlier. Views of the lake itself, working with shaped glass on the right-hand side, which is a kind of J section that's a double glazed sealed unit. And then thinking about this deep winter light that comes into the project. This photo was taken, I think, in December, so you can see the way that light shapes and penetrates the project. And then continuing on, hallways that also become libraries, and always trying to kind of double up program wherever possible. And then, you know, this kind of ongoing obsession and interest in hardware. So you're looking at in the middle wood that we've shaped. The upper one is actually 3D printed in plastic, and the bottom is actually cast in bronze. So that's the process. And then things like custom tables. These are some sketches, and this is the bronze legs of a custom table. And then lighting that we also designed and printed out as 3D prints. And then views of the final part of the project. So this is a kind of view from above, looking at the main building. This is an aerial view looking at the green roofs and the various extensions. And then a view looking at the point where we're really trying to integrate the built form with the landscape. So the very last project I want to share is actually a project we just finished, the Ace Hotel in Toronto. And we worked with a group called Atelier Ace, which was their in-house design team, and ourselves. So we were the design architects, the architects of record, and the architects of the public space, and then collaborating with Atelier Ace directly. The project is located in downtown Toronto, and we love the red brick garment district. We love the existing warehouse buildings, and we sort of lament the fact that many of these buildings have been demolished and many of them have been replaced by shiny condominiums. So this is a drawing looking at the materiality of the brick facade. A study model looking at it overlooking St. Andrew's Playground. It's located at the corner of Camden and Brant. And then a study looking at it in the street context of Brant. And this is the facade overlooking the park. And a study of the lobby where you can see these shaped, poured in place structural frames. And then looking at the corner, so this on the right-hand side is Brant and on the left-hand side is Camden, where the structural frames come out to become the canopy proscenium of the project. And then a further study of the elevation with a kind of the screens and different elements bringing you up to the right level. So there's a ramp and a revolving door and a kind of lobby inside. And just giving you a sense of the kind of exploratory drawings, trying to understand the relationship between the lower level and the street, and then this floating lobby in the middle. And then some study models that give you a sense of the park on the right-hand side. And then this is the final project. So this is a view giving you a sense of it looking over, looking onto the park. And the Brant, Camden is the street on the left, and Brant is the street in your foreground. This is a view from Camden looking at the side of the building. And this is a view of it from the park looking back to the building itself. And what we really loved was the kind of the depth we were able to create. So we're not building a warehouse building, we're trying to convey the kind of materiality of those buildings that we love. And so you can see the kind of the depth of each of the structural frames. A view at night where you're actually seeing the last frame and last knuckle coming right outside. And then the kind of detailing of the brick. So unlike the traditional warehouse buildings, this is all precast brick. It's done in a factory in a controlled environment. And we're actually really articulating the fact that it's actually not laid up by hand. We're using a Norman pattern and a kind of, so we're using the brick very deliberately to explain what it's actually doing. And then here's a view of the front entry. So you can see this kind of wooden canopy, the last knuckle coming outside, and the kind of main entry to the lobby. On Brant Street, you can see the kind of a grade change from Camden down towards the lake. And you can see how much you can see right into the main lobby itself. And views from the street looking into the lobby. And then you can see the brick frame itself that is part of the west elevation of the building. So when you enter the building, you can see this lobby is actually levitating or floating. You can see beyond the kind of steel rods that are holding it up. And then these large knuckles that we use to kind of bring the load down to the foundations. And so this is the kind of view from the reception area overlooking the park. And a view looking at the main lobby space itself, the bar on the left. And then looking back to the entrance off of Camden. And then we designed all of these hanging light fixtures out of fiberglass and wood. And then the descent down to the lower level. So here you're actually seeing the splay of the foundations coming down to the lower level. and then a stair going up, and you're kind of part of the bar, you're between the structure and the stair. And then a large piece that was designed by Howard Sutcliff, and we call it Horizon Line, positioning you looking south to Lake Ontario, with the shimmering waters of Lake Ontario being kind of depicted in the kind of wood and weathering steel. A view from the south wall looking north. So you can see again the stair you just came out down, the kind of hanging lobby, and then the structure on your left-hand side with these custom copper lights that we designed. And again, a view of this floating lobby, a detail of one of these lights. And then again, a stair to the second floor meeting rooms where you're really in the structure itself, all board form concrete. And a kind of view looking again south to Horizon Line. From the lobby looking across to the park. And a view from the second floor looking down. A view of some of the hotel rooms that we designed with big window bays that really create a threshold between the city and your room. And then finally, a kind of glimpse of the kind of exterior brick. So for us, the kind of issue of how you materialize architecture really relates to thinking about light, thinking about the seasons, thinking about the ways that you fabricate and work with your fabricators to really hopefully realize buildings that become places in both the city and in our amazing Canadian landscape. So thank you so much.
Bridget, thank you for that incredible presentation. I think that in my opening comments, the jury comments are quite true. You and Howard have created a lasting impact on Canadian architecture. We'd like to continue the presentation and with a panel discussion. And I'd like to ask the first panelist, Elsa Lam, who is the editor of Canadian Architect magazine. She trained in architecture at University of Waterloo, obtained her post-professional Masters of Architecture from McGill, and completed her PhD in Architectural History and Theory at Columbia University in New York City. She is the co-editor of the book Canadian Modern Architecture. Elsa, welcome to the panel.
Thanks so much, Silvio.
And I'd like to also bring on at the same time, before we get into the panel discussion, Mason White, who is a professor at Daniels Faculty of Architecture, Landscape and Design at the University of Toronto. He is the founding partner of Lateral Office, an experimental design practice based here in Toronto, with a focus on architectural beautiful, entangled relationship with the environment. Mason, I'd like you to please join us.
For having me, Silvio, and everyone. And Bridget, great talk.
I think Elsa is going to lead the panel discussion.
Sure, I'll start. Thank you so much for the presentation, Bridget, and for showing us these projects in such great depth, as well as giving us the overview of some of the bigger concerns that you're working with in your work. I want to congratulate you, especially on the Ace Hotel. I think it's perhaps there's a few projects that one can visit, without being specifically invited to visit. But I think that the Ace Hotel is really maybe one of the first projects where it's really possible and inviting for anyone to just walk in the doors and have a coffee in the lobby and poke around and see the meeting rooms and to really enjoy your work at such scale. So it's really fabulous in that way. And I think that there's a lot of anticipation around that, and that people's expectations and hopes have been really fulfilled in the amazing work that you produced here. I want to ask you, a bit more about that, because it's also a building where you are working with different kinds of constraints than maybe you've worked with in some of your other projects, working with a taller height, but also a kind of really infilled urban site, and with very little kind of possibility for landscaping. And also working with, a developer and presumably some kinds of, budget and time pressures to complete the project. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about working with those constraints, but also how you were able to achieve what you did under those constraints, and what kinds of possibilities that suggests for other developer projects in Toronto.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And maybe a few years ago, we did a very small project on Schollard Street, a 4-story building, urban infill, using brick. And in a way, it was a really great experiment for us about thinking about modernity and brick and urban fabric. And so we really, we love that project because it really, for us, allowed us to explore all those things together. And so when we were asked to work on this hotel, it was really a kind of early prototype. And it had won an urban design award from the city of Toronto. And we felt that it was really a kind of, so brick was a kind of no-brainer. It was just really very much part of this neighborhood. In a way that when the developers approached us, I think of ourselves as often reluctant architects. So we said to them, well, if this project doesn't contribute something positively to the city, that we were better off doing nothing. And that we really weren't that interested in contributing to some mediocre building in Toronto, because we have lots of those already, and that we wanted this to really be a kind of community living room and a kind of really urban space. And so part of that was that we asked if we could visit every ACE hotel that there was to check them out, to really understand, what this was all about. And many of their existing buildings many of their ACE hotels were existing buildings, but I feel like they are super proud of what they accomplished. The fact that they went the distance for us was really great. And they actually want to do more stuff with us, which is kind of unbelievable. And we hope that the city gets to use it as a kind of just urban meeting place. So
Maybe just to jump in there and also say, Bridget, it's always a pleasure to see your work, having been fortunate to be your colleague at U of T now for close to 15 years. Often seeing you in the hallways, always enjoy being on panels with you, but to sit and see you go through the work is such a pleasure. Question to you, and you said one of my favorite phrases that you always say, I see you say with your students often, which is, you said, we asked the question if we could go see some of the other ACE hotels, and this whole idea of asking questions, I think, is sort of at the core of your and Howard's work, and how you bring your studio and others in your practice into that, and even your clients and builders and fabricators and engineers and mechanical engineers, and in all aspects, they all kind of come in are willing to ask these questions. I was thinking about how obvious that was, and the sort of curiosity of the practice. The practice sort of possesses a sort of curiosity that it satisfies through asking these questions. And I wanted to ask you a question about time, because you speak to this a lot, and you opened up with section, time, and light. And I'm thinking that these things collide in a sort of geological layering of elements that all require patience. And I was suddenly dawned on me, I was like, that's it. Bridget is basically saying our practice is about patience. She's saying this is about the ultimate test. And something that I think we all struggle with in all aspects of our lives today, pre-COVID, post-COVID, whatever it might be, is our sort of patience and willingness to let ideas unfold, or patience and willingness to work through a challenge or an opportunity with a consultant or a client or a collaborator. And I know this is a throwaway question, but I'm I'm wondering, A, if you would agree that this is a sort of necessary trait in the field, and B, what are ways that we can, I guess, employ our patients in a conventional practice-based process? So of course we have concept design phase that can go all too quickly, and we have other phases that can go all too quickly. How do you find ways to embed patients into the work and into the process of the work?
So really interesting. I mean, we think about time a lot, and we think about the kind of way that time impacts the weathering and the patina of buildings. We also think, sometimes we're no good, but we're slow. So we never tell anyone we're fast, because again, architecture takes time. I would say one thing that, is interesting is that we've actually been so fortunate to have certain clients where we've worked with for 30 years, 20 years, 15 years. We've done multiple projects. And I would say that time period is so amazing for us, because it allows us to experiment. By the time we've done a few things together, sometimes very small things, there's like a shorthand, and you can just keep trying new things. And so for us, we've had these long projects, and then shorter projects, and then different things. So we have different scales and timelines that are operating simultaneously, and then different clients where we can have a 30-year conversation. You can kind of go somewhere with that, and that they become really collaborators and kind of really interested as much in the process as the final outcome. And so for us, that's been so fortunate, because we typically don't do RFPs or RFQs,
Right.
and we actually kind of just get someone that calls us and says, "So what do you think about this?" And we're not a big practice. We never wanted to be like a large corporate entity, because we didn't really like spending all our time telling other people what to do. So we just, we've kept it really small. So the kind of, we've said we would never have any more employees than Governor General's medals. So there's kind of a ratio. And
well, you can have
right
a lot
now,
of employees now, I think.
No, we only have 8 employees.
Oh, okay.
So we like to really just, work on projects ourselves, and we build all of our own models in-house. But time is essential, because it's not so instant, especially when you have a new programmatic type, a new type of site that you haven't dealt with before. And if you sort of in the end want it to look like it's always been there, that's really hard. And it means you have to think about a lot of things to kind of make it look like it belongs there. And that's, so that's one of the things we actually aim for. And but to get there is not always so easy. And
maybe
time,
a brief follow-up, if I may, but with the Point William project, and others as well. You confessed maybe almost sheepishly that it was a 20-year project, but I think in some ways that kind of speaks to both the patience and maybe more the sort of timeless quality of the project. It's so powerful. It feels as ancient in a way as some of the rock that you left untouched, right? It feels like it's there and you sort of worked around it. What is it like to work on your own project 10 years later, to come back and, even your own home in some ways is to come back and see your own work? Do you reflect, or how do you see the work that now you're this far out in your practice, several decades in? Do you look back at your 2010 version of the Point William project and think, oh, I would have done that corner differently, or I might have used a different material that didn't quite do? How do you work on your own work again, and what is that like? That not every architect gets to do that, as you say, with repeat clients.
Yeah, so I mean, something like the Point William is interesting because we actually worked with the same clients over 20 years. So it wasn't 20 years continuously. There were gaps in between. Okay, we weren't that slow. But part of what's interesting is that there's an echoing from one project to the next. There's actually a kind of material palette that evolves. There's actually a kind of, hardware that we develop for one, we modify to be appropriate for the next, but there's a kind of way that there are these really interesting threads and experiments that go from one to the next to the next. And then we reach a point where we're in a different place architecturally. So some of the hardware that we did on the boathouse, we worked with an amazing Japanese master craftsman, and he only had to do 2 door handles, but they're amazing. And when you end up with having to do like 50 door handles, it's a different thing. So we ended up using 3D printing and kind of a whole other level of craft technology to be able to achieve, a different resolution of hardware, a different construction methodology to get there. And so we've learned a lot over time. And so part of the joy and the pleasure of all of these projects is again, this echoing and learning from one and embedding it into the next. And so for us, that's where to do multiple projects with the same client, and one that is ambitious about the quality of design and loves furniture as much as lighting, as much as the spaces, is you just get to try a whole bunch of stuff and really learn from each one of the different scales that you're working at. And I just think for us, that level of experimentation, we really do not take lightly. It's really a pleasure and a privilege to be able to do it. And it's only because we have, a few clients that just love architecture, and they're not into lifestyle or kind of real estate value. They just love the act of architecture. And it's kind of weird that we have a few clients that are actually trained as architects. Isn't that just so strange? But they've been really amazing because they just also love, the discipline so much that we get to really work through a lot of stuff with them.
I want to pick up on something that Mason was talking about. He was putting the kind of keyword of patience on the table. I'd maybe add to that the word attention, and maybe the word relationship as well, from the things that you're talking about, Bridget. It seems to me that that maybe these are also rare qualities these days, and maybe they're all tied together in some ways, that there's a real attention in your work to the kinds of qualities that you were talking about, light and materiality, but also to the particularities of different places, and knowing a bit more of the backstory behind some of these projects. Also sometimes very kind of seemingly incidental things like the bylaws for the site. I remember you telling the story of how the Wong Dai Sin Temple came about partially because of these parking restrictions that required an enormous number of parking spaces on the site. So, this response of cantilevering was partly to fulfill that requirement.
So constraints are always good. And I mean, I think that part of it is that they require a lot of scratching your head to find the right solution. And, like with the Wong Dai Sin Temple, the city of Markham planner said, well, just put some columns underneath the end of it and you won't have a cantilever. And we said, well, the whole point is to have a cantilever like that. And the client, the Wong Dai Sin FLK, who are our clients, basically loved the idea that it was both, asymmetrical but in balance. For them, Tai Chi is actually the core. Tai Chi is an expression of their spirituality. So when they do Tai Chi, it's not just exercise, it's actually who they are as a kind of community. And so when they saw it, they just their eyes lit up, and it was kind of and then we're getting pressure from the city of Markham to say, well, just put a bunch of columns in and it'll be fine. And so we had to really work hard. We worked with Blackwell, our structural engineers. We worked with Verde Alliance, who did the most amazing concrete formwork. Then we actually recommended Verde Alliance as the concrete formers for the Ace Hotel because we had such a great relationship with them. And I would say for me, one of the things about Toronto is that, we work so closely with our fabricators, and contractors come and go, but we have metal workers, woodworkers, different, trades that we just love. And we really just value our long-term relationships with all of them because they are the makers and they make things happen. And we learn so much back and forth with them, and that they become a really critical part of our community because, and we have some of them that were actually former students from our architecture school who ended up not completing their architecture degree, but becoming, fabricators, and they are phenomenal. And, so much of what we've done, all the mock-ups are really part of a back and forth conversation with them. And just just for us, it's such a pleasure working with so many people in the kind of larger community. And maybe that's one of the things about architecture that I find so satisfying, is that it's so human. It's like, on one hand, we have all these CNC machines and all this digital stuff, but it's actually people that actually make buildings happen. And I feel like we could never have realized the body of work that we have, without remarkable clients who love architecture, but also just such an array of different builders in different parts of the world and different parts of Ontario who are so skilled at what they do. And that a lot of what we want to do is to make their work shine and make their work so visible because they're so skilled. And oftentimes you actually design because you actually know that they can build it. You know that they're so capable of building it, and it changes the way you actually draw stuff, because you kind of know that sometimes if you don't know that they can do it, then you might change it, adjusts, you're a bit less assertive in how you design things going together. But if so we're working on a project right now where we actually knew who was doing all the millwork before we actually started the drawings. Total game changer, because we just knew, we said, oh, we know. And so they then built a whole series of mock-ups of all, so we drew a whole bunch of mock-up drawings so they could do all the mock-ups. And then it was like better than you had imagined. And the fact that you knew that before you went into it, it's just been such a pleasure, such a pleasure. So
yeah. That's so interesting that you say that, because I mean, the concrete formwork on the Ace Hotel is so, fussy in parts, like the inset light fixtures, the corner relief on those arching columns. You'd have to be pretty confident in your fabricator to be able to execute them, so that you're not showing up on site and saying like, this is all wrong, it all has to, you have to.
And they had done the temple, which had all these pre-stressed cantilevers, and none of the concrete in the Wong Dai Sin Temple was architectural concrete. They did not have the money to do that. It was a really, so on one hand, it looks kind of like impressive, but it was, they're a nonprofit group, they're a religious organization, so every penny mattered. And so it was just regular concrete, no fancy anything. And they were phenomenal. And so that was partly we just had such a great relationship with them. They did such an amazing job. So at the beginning of the hotel, we actually recommended to the developer, we would like you, so we took them to the temple, we showed them all the underside of the structural slab, and then they actually were able to negotiate a kind of getting them to do it. So I feel like for us, things like that really matter a lot, because you could imagine a disaster if that point, we asked for board form concrete, they had to form all the steel channels into the formwork and then remove it. Like, so it just requires thinking 3 steps ahead, but we totally knew that they were capable of doing it. So in Toronto, we're so lucky to have such great trades, like across the board in every discipline, but it's more a matter of figuring out how their work can shine in your project, right? Like, it's like, and so for them, it's like, if for that aspect, their work is front and center, and they did such a fantastic job, and we're so proud of them, and so pleased with the outcome, and we couldn't have done it without them.
Yeah, it seems like a very different approach than, getting a general contractor and bidding things out to, the lowest bidder. It's very much putting particular fabricators first and foremost in the work, and carrying forward to your design even. And
again, in every project, not every trade matters the most. So you don't need everyone to be a superstar. So in a way, it's more figuring out what really is essential to making that project happen, and what can be sort of, more straightforward. So there's always a balance, and you really need to figure out what that balance is for the project.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's to your list of words that you added, Elsa, too, that word relationship. I mean, it basically is the cultivation of those relationships, to have the patience and the wherewithal to really build out a relationship with trades or clients. It sounds like maybe we'll be seeing some more things from Bridget and Howard for the ACE. That would be exciting. I
So
wonder.
I have to tell you, I have to admit,
yeah.
Mason, I'm actually not a particularly patient person. So I just have to say, so even though you say time, I don't think
Well,
I possess.
the thing, yeah, I mean, the thing about that is, and I am sure that is a strength in your case to actually expect those things now. But I feel like there's a long view. I could see that. I could see, having worked with you, and I know when you want something, you expect a quick turnaround. But I'm interested in maybe that what you're asking of others is patience to get through a longer view of something. And maybe you spoke a lot about seasonality and landscape. And I think actually that is one aspect of time, but I would say there's a deep time aspect. That's why I was referring to geological earlier, is that geological is deep time. Seasons are nothing. That's a snap of the finger. That's a batting your eyelashes kind of moment. Or generational time. I think that's quite interesting too. I see your work possesses a kind of timeless quality. I mean, I'm also interested in the fact that the title was called Materializing Architecture, because in some ways it really, all of the things that you speak to and what the work exudes to me is almost about its immateriality. Of course, we see prototyping in the beauty of bronze and incredible crafts, like incredible craft in the work, but it's the shadows, like the light is beautiful, but it's the shadows that present this sort of immateriality and expose the volume and the space. And it's, I think it's these other sort of immaterial, or the generational time of the work to evolve, or the weathering of the steel, right? These are things that are a little bit more immaterial. Like weathering steel is a pretty messy, unpredictable process, and it's not always consistent. And that isn't something that one can rely on. And there's beauty in that I know you recognize, or water, and these other things that are kind of immaterial. They're not, water is not a material. You can't use water in that way, and the landscape is not a material. It's not something you buy off the shelf and it comes in a certain way and stays that way forever. It's always changing, and sometimes it dies and sometimes it's reborn. And so I'm kind of interested in I find even more depth in the work today than I had before, and I had seen a lot of depth before, so it's getting quite geological. But I'm hoping there's some questions popping up in the chat, or that I believe Carlos is going to curate some. But maybe just before we get to those, something that Elsa and I and Sylvia had discussed with Silvio just before, when we did a pre-discussion, was this idea about what kind of challenges you might be experiencing in practice today, or what kind of challenges do you think are essential hurdles for architecture to address, that you may be addressing in your practice directly, indirectly, in some of your other activities, or things that part of this NORR ed that all at all strata of the tier within practice that we should be aware of in architecture. What challenges do you think are urgent for our time?
I think practice is getting harder. It's not getting easier. I think that we have to take on so many different things. So, there's all the zoning and kind of municipal approval process, which is not easier anywhere. Issues of sustainability, deep thinking about sustainability is requiring a whole game-changing kind of requirement of reflection about what we do as architects, how much we do, why we do it. I think that it's hard to get skilled people to work on projects. COVID has not been good, but maybe this was a reality even before that. and we're in the education business. So, you know, I spend a lot of my time, like you, Mason, in architecture schools, and I believe in the kind of importance of educating the next generation. But it's hard. It's hard to find, you know, people with the right level of commitment and interest in exploration. So I feel, I mean, I feel we're so fortunate in what we do, and, you know, partly because we're not that big of an office, we don't need to be peddling all the time, and we just get to work on really wonderful things, but it's hard work. And I don't feel like it's getting easier. I think it's really, when I think about young people starting their own practice and how many balls you're having to juggle at the same time. And I feel like we keep taking on more things, but it means that, you know, two people like Howard and I working together may not be able to cover the breadth of things that are required in a typical regular practice. And I just see it, it's just, I think it's very challenging. So I'm not sure I would want to, I have a lot of respect if people are actually starting a practice now, because I just think it's really, it's really challenging. And I feel like, you know, we worked with one developer who kind of was, took a project the full distance. But many developers don't think like that, and he probably wouldn't have wanted, like, if he knew what the journey was at the end, he might not have started it at the beginning. I'm not sure. And so and then, you know, a lot of the clients are developers these days, like as typically, and so I feel like if that's I just think that it's really challenging. And I think, but also I think, you know, with, you know, CNC fabrication and all the kind of computer 3D printing and all the experiments that we do, it's also pretty amazing. So we're able to redefine now what craft is. We can actually do things with the help of, you know, 3D printing in bronze or stainless steel that you just couldn't even have imagined before. And it can be done at a cost that is actually totally doable and reasonable, and you can control all the different processes. So there's all kinds of really amazing things that are happening now that just 10 years ago, 15 years ago, were not possible. So I feel like it's a really interesting time, but also a super challenging time simultaneously.
Bridget, the discussion that we were having with Mason and Elsa last week was basically surrounding students that are at the university level, either starting or finishing. And much like you, I started in a very small office, and small offices are fantastic because they afford you the ability to work on very small projects where, like your office, you're not only doing the architecture, but you're doing the furniture, and you're doing the fittings, and you're doing things that the large offices, as you alluded to previously, like ours, where you're not allowed to do that because you're working on such large projects that those things aren't in the scope. They're just not, and it's much more difficult in a large office. So when you have a student who's graduating, you know, whether you're at Waterloo in the Waterloo program or you're at another school where you end up graduating, it becomes a very big question. And having gone from a small office like I did to a larger office is quite different than, you know, doing your career from a large office, because it's different. In a large office, you don't have all that ability to work on the small project where you basically do everything. And, you know, the richness of the craft that you talk about, you don't seem to get in the very, very large offices. Now, there are obviously some exceptions in the larger offices that are similar to your office, where they say, we're not going to grow. And you know, in particular, I can think of Renzo Piano's office, where he says, I'm going to stay small, I'm not going to grow, and this is what I'm going to do. But for the most part, the large offices are large offices, and they concentrate on certain types of work. So you know, it's Mason was talking about time, and I'd be interested in hearing how you balance because you're doing some incredible things with teaching right now, especially being at Yale and the University of Toronto, and your practice, because even though you have a small practice, your work is quite, incredible that you're doing right now. So how do you and Howard balance all of that? Because it's still quite a heavy workload at your office and your teaching, and you must be run off your feet all the time. So how do you actually balance all of that?
I think we're a little crazy. It is a struggle. Things take time, but I also think there's a real pleasure in it. So I love teaching at the University of Toronto. I've been teaching there since for a really long time, longer than most of my. So when I tell them when I started teaching, most of them weren't born that time. And then I really enjoy teaching at other universities as well, because there's just a very different cohort of students, and so I feel like time is definitely precious. And you need to really use it wisely. But for me, I would say there's been a very deep pleasure in actually both teaching and practicing together, and not just one or the other, but actually both at the same time. And I feel like I've benefited a lot from doing that, and it's been really so fulfilling for me to do both at the same time. So, but not easy, but you just get used to it.
But worthwhile. Thank
Definitely.
you. I think we're going to go on to see if some of our audience has questions, and Carlos actually has been collecting the questions. So I'm going to turn this over to Carlos.
Thanks for turning it over. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I've been fortunate. I live about literally a block away from your Craven Roadhouse. And,
Oh yeah.
And so I've been stalking that property for about 16 years now, periodically walking by and staring at it at all seasons. And one of the things that one of the topics here that Mason and Sylvia alluded to, this kind of timelessness of your work. So I've seen it evolve. I've seen it, the pictures that you have on your website, and kind of what the project is today is substantially different. And I'm wondering if, given your long practice, have you been revisiting some of these projects in their current state and documenting them in a way? Because I think that is one of the essential qualities of your work, is that timelessness, its ability to kind of to withstand kind of the changes around it. But also, I'd be interested to see or to hear how you've observed those changes, and kind of some of maybe the projects that you've worked on that kind of have impacted you in terms of change over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I would say every building is subject 365 days a year to weathering, right? It's so that's just a reality. The Craven Road project was really, for us, it's very special. It just recently was designated as heritage. So it was actually started in the mid-90s. The entire budget for just the Craven Road house was $100,000, which was not, now it's unbelievable, but even back then it was actually a pretty low budget, and that was all our client had. So he found a lot, he looked at other lots, we did studies on other potential lots that he was thinking of buying. Robert Hill is trained as an architect. He works at KPMB. He's actually responsible for the Canadian Bibliographic Dictionary. So you have to be a dead architect to be in it. It's, every entry is researched by him, date of birth, date of death, every single building. He spends a lot of time in archives and libraries to really cross-reference every single entry. It's a truly remarkable thing what he's done over the last 20 years. And Robert doesn't have a huge amount of money. And so we actually took on the challenge, and we worked really directly with him to design a house for $100,000 in 1995, 96, and it was built. And he lived in it. He's still living there. And then about 10 years later, his neighbors wanted to sell their house. And he worked out a kind of agreement with him that he would buy the rear portion of their house and build a one-car garage for them so that they would still have a garage and access from Craven Road to their house. And then it gave Robert a site for a studio, because he felt if they sold their house, someone would build some ugly townhouse next to him and he would lose his light. And so he did that. We built the studio for $75,000. So that would have been in the early 2000s. And that included the neighbor's garage and a green roof. So that was one of the projects I showed you, the little one-room building with the little light coming in. So we treated it as a great experiment. So the City of Toronto permit drawings show a garage with a car parked in it and doors. So don't tell anyone. Hopefully no one from the city is listening to this. But Robert just happens to not drive. He's never been, he doesn't have a car, he doesn't drive. So it was a garage became his studio. And but it was all about how light came into the space. He spends a lot of time in there as an archivist, and we wanted a really wonderful glow. We didn't want any pot lights. We didn't want anything on the ceiling. And so those little skylights actually fill the whole space with light, and they're kind of essential. So then we built one, and then we built the other. And then, I would say that the wood that we used was a solution on the exterior wood cladding of the Craven Road house, was a solution to a very low budget. So it was marine plywood and then wood siding. And it probably needs to be redone because of the time period. And so we're working with him to figure that out.
I think I've seen it redone once, and at least from a finishing standpoint. Maybe it's still the original cladding, but that's an interesting story on the garage. I've never seen it used. And
well, because he doesn't own a car, so that could be why.
The other question I would have is relative to the mock-ups, and I'd be curious as to when you engage them in your process. Is that something that, is it start right off at the schematic level of the project, or is it once you get going in terms of the construction that evolves?
Yeah, so probably in our construction documents, we'll actually do drawings of all the mock-ups that we want fabricated. And so it's never at the very early stages, because we're just still figuring out site and, all that stuff. But we actually will do drawings of mock-ups, and they will need to be fabricated, and we'll review them and make some minor adjustments before they actually go into production.
So they're heavily priced. They're heavily integrated into the pricing of the project.
So they have to be, so they're just part. So they're right in any documents that are bid out. The mock-ups are part of that. Right. So they just get absorbed into the overall, but what you learn from them is invaluable and really essential.
Okay, let me see if there's questions coming in. Okay, this is from Maria. How to get to state when you can actually do very interesting and real architectural projects instead of making money in the market? What is your advice for young architects?
I think you have to know when to say no. So I would say that, we don't think we're the right architects for everybody. And so a lot of times we actually really think, what could we actually contribute to this project? And a lot of times, you think, I think they don't really need us. They don't really want us. What they want is maybe lifestyle or something else. And it's just, we don't actually think there's a good fit. So I think that you have to actually really think carefully about what you can make, what positive contribution can you make to this client, the site, the budget, the conditions. And sometimes you have an idea that can actually be amazing and transformative. And sometimes, you know, you don't have a, like, so we really think about that carefully, and we're not afraid to say no. Because in a way it allows you to focus on things that are actually going to matter and that you think you can make a contribution to. And we, you know, so early on, there were lots of projects where, you know, we would actually prefer to take a really low budget freestanding house in an apple orchard for a client who loved medieval towers, then do some big, you know, kind of kitchen renovation that was way more dollar value, but maybe less kind of potential and not as kind of interesting a client who really had a vision for something. And we felt we could actually be and enable that vision, as opposed to, you know, whereas other projects, anyone could do that, add a big sort of addition on, and they didn't really need us. And so, so I think that it's hard to make the right, you never know if you made the right choice, but I think that you're always having to make choices. Again, you know, especially if you want to stay smaller rather than getting bigger, you can't do everything. And so you just have to make some choices. And then, you know, just, we never look backward. We never cry over spilt milk. We just move on. And so.
Right, and a question from Frank Panici. Your work is beautiful and conveys spirit. Can you speak to the unknown quality of your work, and how does spirit, soul evolve in your projects?
So when we worked with the Sisters of St. Joseph, they told us that their existing chapel in Morrow Park was the heart and soul of that building. And that in the new project, they wanted to make sure that the chapel was their heart and soul. And that was a really interesting for us. And it was really, it made us really think carefully. And it was tough to kind of really think through what would ensure that it was really the center of all of their, the whole complex, because they were religious women and the chapel was so crucial to who they were. So I think that those questions that you have to ask yourself are really tough questions, and there's no easy answer. And so in that project, from the very beginning, they love water, and we actually took them to different projects with water next to buildings. We had consultants talk to them. So water was not like an add-on, it was actually part of the core idea of the building. And that by educating them, we actually were able to put a chapel in the middle of a reflecting pool and have it, you know, become like really central. And I think for me, those are things that become part of the soul of the building, that it has a life to it, and it's not just a space, but it's actually central to everything that they believe in and why they want to even do the project in the first place. And I would say that the issue of the heart and soul of a project, I often find that we end up connecting with clients because of our values and a shared set of values. So with the sisters, you know, they called us up, we met with 5 leadership women that were part of running the Sisters of St. Joseph, and they talked to us for 2 hours, and they said, thank you, and we left. And we're thinking like, and we just talked. We didn't actually have present them with anything. And then 2 weeks later, they called us back. So we came back. We said, do you want us to do anything or show you anything? They said no, because they had prepared a list of all their values, as sisters would do. And we had addressed all their values without knowing what they were. And then they said, well, we don't have a site, but we want to do this. And that was the beginning of our journey. And so we didn't show them a portfolio. We would tell you, we're not healthcare experts. We'd never done one of these before. So they really related to us based on our discussion and values. And that was the beginning of a very, wonderful journey. And So I think that that's sort of a long way of kind of connecting to the heart and soul of a project, and the fact that you know, we're just trying to do work that's authentic and really addresses specific clients, and not trying to, you know, sort of do every single project that exists, and then hopefully, you know, there's some kind of resonance, and you know, someone else calls us up and says, hi, do you want to work with us? And say, maybe, why should we? And then we kind of go from there. So
I do have another question with regards to, you know, the process. It appears that there's a great degree or level of control, whether through the drawings, the mock-ups, even within the research. And I'm curious about the accidental and what role that plays in your projects, and whether it's in part of the process or at the end, essentially.
oh, so the accidental is critical in everything. We have to be totally open to the accidental and the unexpected, and kind of where necessary, just absorb it into the overall. I don't know if I can think of a kind of, you know, really good example, but we're always, I mean, I would say partly this discussion about how human construction is, it's actually nothing is perfect, right? I mean, that's actually what we like. And sometimes we've been working on some projects with some Bavarian fabricators who are amazing, but sometimes their work looks too perfect. And then we go, why does this look so weird? But it's kind of because everything is CNC'd and it's so well done that it's kind of like a bit scary that it's kind of so well done. So so this kind of so for us, that's why the issues of weathering and patina and the kind of aging of things is actually something that we love to think about a lot, and kind of try to absorb in our work.
This next question's from David Cluzio.
Yeah.
I'll read it in completeness. Bridget, really enjoyed the presentation and conversation. It is really refreshing to see that there is a place for such bespoke work in the Canadian context. It has been an exciting journey to watch over the years. I just returned from a journey to Scandinavia and saw some Aalto work in person. I wonder if you could talk about other architects that inspire you and Howard.
So I would say Aalto is one of them. In the early 1992, we received a Canada Council B grant. And that part of our question that we were interested in exploring was the relationship between modernity and the vernacular. And so we used the money from our Canada Council grant to travel to Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and then at the very end, St. Petersburg. And we took 6 weeks and we did that whole trip. And we saw a lot of amazing work, and it was really inspiring to see. And so we saw the work of Sverre Fehn, we saw a lot of Arne Jacobsen, and some really interesting Danish landscape designers who did a lot of cemeteries. We visited Asplin's work and Leverance's work in Sweden. And then we saw pretty much every single Aalto project in Finland. And it was so interesting because it was, for us, a formative trip, really, really important. We're indebted to the Canada Council for putting the resources into being able to travel. And for us, it was really just really critical. So I think that seeing work and being inspired by others is really key. But also maybe the issue of Scandinavia is that they share a latitude, a similar climatic zone, a similar geomorphology. So traveling through Finland was, you know, really familiar, except for the long roads, the signs with these long names. The kind of forest was familiar. Everything about the kind of landscape was familiar. And so I felt like you were learning more than just the work of one architect, because you could see the dialogue between like a Jorn Utzon and a Leverance and an Asplin and Aalto. Like you could figure out from looking at all these different buildings what they saw, what they didn't, what they were inspired by. And you really start to understand a whole constellation and a whole kind of complex community by traveling through all those different territories. And so for us, it was more than just one architect. It was actually just understanding a kind of multiple conversations, which I thought was really, really interesting.
Kevin Cooper from our UK office, he asks, is the creative process the same for each of your projects? How much of a role does intuition play?
Oh, I would say intuition is so essential. It's really key. You just have a feeling, and then you chase it for a long time. Sometimes it's so inevitable and it's really easy, and other times it's really hard and you just have to keep working at it over and over and over. So it's just, there's no kind of, each project is different. There's no formula and there's no shortcuts.
You had mentioned the work is a collaborative process. Can you give us a glimpse on how the collaboration is invoked in your office?
So Howard and I met in third-year architecture school at the University of Waterloo. We were working on models really late at night. We actually built a model of Tatlin's monument to the Third International, and we had to figure out the structure and how it was really built. And we ended up finding sort of a Swedish architecture museum had historic photographs. So we've actually just started working together a really long time ago. We've traveled together, so we have a lot of shared reference points. And then we don't, it's like we work on every project together. So it's not like your project, my project, different partners have different projects. We're really not, we just don't, and we work on different parts of projects. But it takes a very broad skill set to realize anything now. A back porch takes a very broad skill set just because things are so complicated. And so you need more than one person. You really rely on both our intuitions to kind of say, maybe that's not so right or not. So, and again, we never think we're always the right architects for everything. We just don't believe that. And if you are, you're just doing your promo and you're not necessarily being really self-reflexive about each situation. So, so again, I think, sometimes it's as much what you decide not to do as what you decide to do that matters.
So just out of curiosity, in some of these long-term relationships that you've had with clients, have you turned a few of them into architects?
No, some of them were already architects before, right, and then decided to pursue other avenues and come back to architecture as clients. None of them have actually gone and done an architecture degree. So and I think, I have to say, right, I mean, as someone who's been part of education like Mason has been for a long time, I think that I just see a generational shift happening. And I actually think that, you have 4-year undergrad and then a 3-year master's, and then you have to spend like 4 or 5 years doing your time and then taking all the exams. I think there's a whole bunch of people that are just not interested. It's a lot of work to do all that stuff. And I just, sometimes, I don't know, Mason, what you think, but I just think there's kind of a shift happening, and the requirements that are all super professional and they're part of, the process of becoming an architect. I'm not sure that there are what the next generation thinks about that. I was on the jury for AIA California. So California is almost the size of Canada, like in terms of population. And they were telling me that they have fewer people registering to be architects. Like their numbers are declining, right? As a kind of, the state of California. I don't know what the indicators are, but I think if I were to think about the students that I teach at U of T, I don't think all of them will be architects. I think they will benefit from an architectural education, but I'm not sure all of them will want to be a professional architect with a stamp.
But That's always been the case though, Bridget, hasn't it? I mean, when you
Yeah.
take a look at the attrition from first year to fifth year when we graduated,
Yeah.
there were huge losses of people there.
Yeah. So.
And into the
No.
profession, yeah.
That's another
But-
testing of patience, maybe, is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
The patience to get gray hair. It's
or no
lose
hair.
it.
or lose it first, whichever it may be. But I mean, yeah, I think these are great questions coming from the audience, Silvio and Carlos. You have a great audience here for Bridget. And I was thinking about one other thing that would be interesting to speak about, because it is a rare quality to see in a talk, and I like it's something that's inherent to Shim-Sutcliff's practice, is sketching and mock-ups. And Bridget's referred to this a lot, and it's certainly something we try in schools, and probably it's maybe something that's done a little bit more in schools in a studio-based setting than it is in practice, where I know there maybe it's done in a trades-based setting where it's like a mock-up will be produced by a trade to kind of, as proof that, flashings will work out the way one has detailed it and so forth. But mock-ups in studio are priceless, and you can see that the attention and relationship and patience, as Elsa put it as well, is so prevalent in the work, that it exudes from it. It's come from that attention to testing things out in sketch and testing things out through little mock-ups, and some of the mock-ups are not pretty. Sometimes they got masking tape on it, it's imperfect. You're holding the model outside your window just trying to get some sunlight on it to see what it does. I think these things don't have to be beautiful. They're a way of testing a relationship and kind of convincing yourself. I see the way Bridget presents it is that I can see as a practice, they're convincing themselves, is this the right direction? Is this the direct? So this question about what's your creative process? What's your intuition? The mock-up in the sketch is intuition manifests as a physical thing. That is the intuition isn't right brain talking to left brain, or I had a thought, let me think on it again. It's writing it down, it's sketching it, it's holding that messy masking tape mock-up somewhere. That's the intuitive process in architecture. It literally is a paper trail, of an actual paper trail of ideas and thoughts and misinformations. And I think it's so wonderful to see that raw aspect in the work come out, and to see it through the process as and that's another timeless quality. I'll say it's a tried and true, timeless working method. You could do a spreadsheet, you could try a notepad, you could write a script for this, you could do these kinds of things, but nothing beats the messy, pencil and masking tape and paper you got lying around.
Mason, I totally agree with you, and I don't know how hard Carlos knows how hard I've tried in my office to bring the sketch paper back and to bring those models back, but it's I don't know, Bridget, whether you agree or not, but I think that the younger generation don't see it that way. It's just it's a little sad when they prefer to sit in front of a machine than go through that. And the other part of the mock-up is, certainly the profession has changed so much that it's hard to actually get those mock-ups on large projects. Convince the developers, convince the big contractors that we've got to do a mock-up. You can't just barrel through and try to do this. You really do have to do the mock-up, and it's so important. But it is a changing industry, unfortunately.
Carlos, you talked about the whole issue of a mistake, and often what happens is when you're doing a drawing, you can actually make a mistake, or you can misread something that could actually be the real solution to the problem. And in a computer, it's actually hard because you have to quantify everything. So there's actually almost no accident. And in the end, I think that this issue of being open to the accidental is actually a really interesting question that you brought up. And it's something that we're very aware of. And I find that through the act of drawing, a mistake can be something positive, and you can learn from that in a good way. So
I think we're almost near the end. I think this has been a fantastic session. Wish we could go on for a lot longer. I want to thank Elsa. Thank you for being on the panel. Mason White, thank you for joining us. Carlos, thank you. Thank you to everyone that was on the session, but most of all, Bridget, thank you for sharing your time. Thank you for your teaching career. I won't mention the date. It's in your bio. Everybody knows where the date is, but it's quite incredible that you're sharing, you know, your teaching career not only at U of T but now at Yale and all of the universities you've been and all the students that you've touched, and your contribution, your and Howard's contribution to Canadian architecture that's, you know, transponded through the world. It's an incredible collection, you know, the 16 awards, and I'm sure you're going to win another 16 in your career. So really looking forward to the project that you're working where you are right now. Thank you again. It was, you know, we're honored that you were on NORR Ed, and welcome back anytime. So thank you.
Oh, thank you for the wonderful invitation. And I would have to say I really enjoyed the discussion with Adele Weider, the one that we did earlier, which I thought was really great, looking at the work of Ron Tom. And keep up all the great work, guys. I think it's wonderful. So really appreciate being able to share things with you guys. And thank you, Elsa, Mason, Silvio, and Carlos.
Thank you all. And we'll see everyone next time. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Look forward to having you back.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.